Before we get into the main discussion, I want to talk about this journey that we've been on over the past several years and the journey that we're going on. Before I start, how many of you came from outside the United States to come here? Everybody look around. I want you to all look around. How many of you came from some region in some part of Asia? Just take a look. Everybody, take a look around. How many people came here from around the world? How many of you came from Europe? How about South America? Anyone from South America? I don't think so. You made the journey here. And your journey really speaks volumes to the journey we've seen with Postgres. And so if you look in the time frame of the last 3 years since we've been having Postgres Vision, if you came to Postgres Vision in San Francisco in 2016, you would have seen us. This was, I think, at that time, the 4th year of Gartner's Magic Quadrant, recognizing Postgres and EnterpriseDB as a leader in the Magic Quadrant. In 2016, in the database category, Gartner had 31 companies, 31, on their quite well-known operational database management Magic Quadrant. 31 companies. In 2018, we've passed through their last MQ in 2017 that came out in November, there are 11 companies. 11 companies on their database Magic Quadrant. That's remarkable. EnterpriseDB continues to be one of those companies. We're obviously proud of that. But that means Postgres is part of Gartner's Magic Quadrant. And think about that short 3-year journey. I mean, there's a massive amount of change happening in the database ecosystem, in the database landscape. There's also a massive amount of roadkill in companies that are building technologies to support your needs. And I think maybe a more interesting way to look at the change and the transformation in the category and this journey is to think about it over a longer time horizon. So this week, at the end of this week, I celebrate my 10-year anniversary here at EnterpriseDB. Thank you. And I think 10 years in any company, but particularly one that is centered on open source software, and particularly one in the database category, gives me the opportunity to have a perspective that maybe you can't get any other way than to have 10 years in one place. And here's what I'll tell you. There's been a remarkable amount of change that's made Postgres more relevant and more prolific. And I think it relates really to 3 essential things. And the first is going to be kind of obvious. The first is technology. I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing that will really drive the adoption of any piece of software is the capabilities of that technology. And if you look at the evolution of Postgres, you'll see that the dramatic shifts over 10 years. And I'm going to call out one other part of technology. That all relates to people. The people who write the code, the people who fix the code, and the expansion of that. I'm not going to talk about technology. You're going to hear from great people here that are from the community. Over the next couple of days, you'll hear from Robert Haas, Andres Freund, you'll hear from Bruce Mobjan and a few others who are here to talk to you about the tech. But without technology improvement, without that technology meeting your needs, there's no way that this journey continues forward. The second is users and customers. It's obvious that without adoption of Postgres, Postgres can't get better. And you guys represent that use expanding around the Postgres technology and ecosystem. But here's the deal. It's a crazy and fantastic cycle. Because what happens is we make technology, customers start to consume it. We have the benefit at EnterpriseDB of having a lot of customers. And so what that means, because we have a lot of core developers in the Postgres community and a lot of customers, what happens? The pace of innovation and the pace of technical improvement goes faster. And why does it go faster? because we've got you as enterprise customers. You start to deploy Postgres in one context, you expand it into a second and a third and a fourth, and you immediately say, hey, I love Postgres, but it doesn't do this. Can you help me with that? Or I love Postgres, but it breaks when I do this. Those turn into feature requests. Those turn into bug fixes. And because there's commercial enterprise surrounding this open source project, we're able to accelerate and create a pattern of acceleration of the creation of features, capabilities, bug fixes, and enhancements. And by enhancing the technology, it gives you more reason to use it and expands even further. And so when I came to EnterpriseDB 10 years ago, Postgres was an incredibly important technology, if not yet fully embraced and adopted by enterprise. But through that cycle of commitment to technology development by commercial entities like EnterpriseDB, and your use of it and that cycle of innovation and feature development, we wouldn't be where we are today. And where we are today puts us in a position to help you take Postgres everywhere, to talk about Postgres being used as prolifically as it is in the cloud. That's the second thing. The third thing that I think is driving Postgres everywhere is a development of a rich and capable ecosystem. And you guys are going to see a lot about this ecosystem through the event here today. But that ecosystem, this is where 10 years matters, in my opinion. That ecosystem doesn't develop easily. When you look at that Gartner Magic Quadrant where there were 31 companies down to 11, what happened to some of that roadkill? Some of it was technologies and businesses that couldn't sustain that cycle with customers of improvement and innovation. Some of it were technologies that may not have been as useful as people imagined they would be. But because it lacked that continuity of a cycle, it lacked an ability to develop the critical third piece, which is a complete ecosystem to support what you need to do to deploy Postgres wherever you want to deploy it. And that ecosystem is really well represented here and outside of this, but you're going to hear from some great speakers. You'll hear from our platinum sponsors, Infosys and IBM. Infosys embracing, as one of EDB's preferred solution providers, embracing Postgres as a cornerstone technology and helping their customers create change in their data infrastructure. IBM adopting Postgres as part of their new cloud private infrastructure and platform, again, to bring extraordinary value to their customers. And you're going to see others, Quest Software, now using their core tools and technologies to support Postgres and help transform the very customers they support, Oracle customers, as part of that ecosystem. And HPE, you'll have a chance to listen to what they're doing with HPE GreenLake. So we've got a lot of companies here who are part of that ecosystem. And that really puts all of us in a position to continue to expand successfully the use of Postgres. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like in the landscape of cloud and beyond. So look, this stats, you've seen these stats. This isn't news to anybody here. What you should take away is what I think most of you would know, that over 70% of enterprises are expanding Postgres dramatically. Expanding their use of cloud dramatically, right? It's almost no one today that isn't using cloud in some fashion or planning rapid expansion. So I don't think this is particularly interesting news anymore. I mean, it's important news because it speaks to the weight of incremental investment that many of you are making. I think it becomes a little more interesting in the context of Postgres when you look at what's happening with database. So this, again, this source of this data is from IDC. And if you look, within database alone, you see the growth of Postgres. I'm sorry, I want everything to be about Postgres. The growth of database is accelerating. We're here in 2018, $4.3 billion of public cloud revenue in database. But what's more interesting is this category of cloud databases growing at a compound annual growth rate of over 30% a year. I mean, that's a big number, a big percent of growth on a big number. And it speaks volumes to the weight of effort and energy that many of you are putting into the incremental expansion of technology in database in the cloud in your environments. We did a survey. We were curious, so we asked Postgres users what percentage of their Postgres databases are in the cloud. Interestingly, 53% responded they've moved no Postgres databases to the cloud. So they haven't, that fast growth chart, 53% they didn't move any. And then if you look from at 51 to 100, you see 11% have moved more than 51% to the cloud. It's a smaller number than I expected to see, given this chart, fast growth. I was surprised that we haven't seen more Postgres adoption in the cloud, and we would also acknowledge that Postgres is one of the most successful cloud databases used by every public cloud vendor. So here's the question. Is that good, or is it bad? And I think the real answer is it's actually complicated. And why? Why is it complicated? I think it's complicated. I think this picture depicts the complication. So remember the chart I showed? Remember this chart? I'm going back. That chart, those bars are the top. They're the red on this chart. This chart shows all the database spend that you guys are investing in. And what it shows is a 10-to-1 difference between databases you're spending in the cloud and databases you spend in your traditional on-prem infrastructure. And if you look at that, actually in 2017, EDB did about just under 20% of our business was cloud database. So we look like you. Our business reflects your business. But I think what makes this complicated is that we have a lot of effort and energy focused on the new opportunities that cloud provides us, but most of our customers have a massive amount of existing infrastructure running on-prem and in more traditional mode. And what that really means is that staff, the applications, your investments in policy and process, your strategies, your budgets are wrapped up heavily in in the iceberg below the waterline. And that's one of the things that makes this complicated. So it's not so easy to say, hey, we're just worrying about cloud, because the truth of the matter is you're not mostly just worrying about cloud. You want to do more, but you're worried about more than cloud, and that makes sense. And so in the context of Postgres Everywhere, and I'm going to come back to this point over and over again, our vision, our mission is to help enterprises and businesses and governments with Postgres everywhere, because that's your reality. Here's another thing that makes it complicated. Managing across platforms is really hard, right? You're not only dealing with now traditional bare metal, you've been dealing with virtual machines for a long time. Many of you have expanded dramatically into containers. Some of you are actually bypassing your cloud strategy to a container strategy. That's an interesting development, and cloud. And you're doing that across multiple platforms and multiple cloud options. So managing across all of that platform ecosystem has gotten harder. It used to be we'd worry about operating systems as kind of the deployment platform decision process. Then in turn we had that deployment model, and then we had cloud, and then we had virtual machines. Then we had that deployment model, virtual machines, and containers. That deployment model, and now add cloud. So it's gotten much harder. So that's another thing that makes it complicated. And so this complexity, if you look at the other side of it, on the business side, you have to tangle, because of this, you have to tangle with more complex governance requirements as you think about where data lives in your organization. You have to put in place new financial controls that didn't have to exist before. Not only do you manage IT in the traditional sense, many of you now have spend that's distributed from traditional IT out to business units who are deploying applications broadly in the cloud. That creates a disconnect in the way you report information and consolidate that information so executives can see things through a single lens, the way it may have operated in the past. You still have to tangle with the issues of vendor lock-in. The question is, have you moved from vendor lock-in, one vendor lock-in in one arena to a vendor lock-in in another arena in cloud? And you got to deal with issues of outages that maybe you didn't have to deal with before, now that you're working as part of a service and a utility. And if we look at the technical side of it, you've got increased complexity there as well. You have to tangle with migration of workloads. And we're going to talk a lot about migration of workloads to cloud today. And it's an important topic that many of you have come back and said, we're on this journey, but we need more help than we're getting. You have to deal with policy enforcement issues. And technology still has to worry about the cost management. And then issues of security, automation, compatibility, a topic we've been focused on since I joined the company. How do we make applications that are running on Oracle on-prem run effectively in the cloud on Postgres? And the whole arena of new sets of skills that you have to bring into your organization. So it's got a lot more complex. So it's gotten harder, hasn't gotten easier, and I don't imagine most of you got more budget to solve those problems. So it raises the question, how do you plan and manage this amount of complexity? And I think you got a few options. And the reality is there's no one right answer, and you're doing most of these things. One, you can do it yourself. How many of you are doing it yourself? Planning, strategy, executing. Few hands up. Second is you can rely on your public cloud database vendor. How many of you are using your public cloud database vendor to help you set your strategy? A hand. I think that's the Amazon guy. Kidding. How many of you are using consultants or integrators to help you with your strategy? I don't see any hands going up there. And then how many are using your enterprise database partners or current infrastructure software partners? So you have options across this landscape that are different. And so let's add a little bit of nuance to that. So we asked the question of that, in that same survey we did earlier, we asked another question. And we got over 1,000 responses. Which is more important to you? Developing new applications in the cloud or migrating existing applications? And we heard very clearly, 61% of you said, developing new applications in the cloud is more important. 39 said migration of applications. This is informing, I think, because it starts to speak to this important topic of what is the focus of your evolution of Postgres and your evolution in the cloud. Is it strategic or is it project-based? And what we've seen from most of our customers is the early work has been heavily weighted towards projects, as represented with new applications and new workloads. We asked another survey question that confounds it. Is your cloud provider more like your cable company or your favorite teacher? 67% of you said they're more like my cable company. 33% of you they're more like my favorite teacher. And again, that doesn't make it good or bad, but it indicates as you invest more in your cloud strategy, it raises the stakes on who's going to help you think about that strategy. Now let me bring it back to Postgres everywhere. You want to put Postgres everywhere? Do you want the strategy disjointed as you look across that landscape? And then I mentioned this earlier, it's gotten a little more complicated still because some of you report to us that your once, just 2 years ago or 1 year ago, prolific move to the cloud strategies actually evolved. It's evolved in a really important way. It said, hey, we want utility computing, but it doesn't have to be public cloud utility computing. And in fact, technologies and containerization have improved, and that ecosystem has improved dramatically. So we're thinking about containers as a more prolific way to deploy in a utility motion, bypassing some parts of our strategy to go to cloud. So here's the deal. here's my view of this. You need a bridge. That as you begin to move away from a project focus and a short-term orientation, you got to bridge to a strategic orientation. And really, at the end of the day, that's our focus. To do that, I think to focus at the strategic level, you have to declare you're embracing the complexity. And I think to embrace the complexity, you have to define that you're going to work with partners and an ecosystem of support that gives you the full set of products that allow you to run your operations seamlessly in any environment. It's not an either or. You clearly said it's not either or. It's not either cloud or on-prem. It is both. It's an and equation. And that means you need a support operation that is able to handle your needs globally. You've seen, looked around this room, how many of you are from, more than half of this audience is not from the United States. And I will point out that in EDB's business, half of our business, 50%, comes from outside of North America. So you need support operation that actually addresses the fact that you use your technologies and Postgres everywhere, and that can support you on a global basis. And you got to have an ecosystem of technology providers that support all the different ways you think about, manage, deploy, and use technology. And that's really, honestly, that's what we've always designed Postgres Vision to be about, is to bring together you with an ecosystem of capable companies that actually help you succeed in the use of Postgres. And the last thing is you got to deal with migration, because the fact of the matter is, as the new workloads represent one area of opportunity. But what we're hearing from our customers is for cloud to become more prolific in your businesses and to fully realize the economic rewards that come from movement to cloud and utility infrastructure, you got to deal with migrations. And you need capabilities and skills and technologies to do that.